The air was thick with tension as Evelyn stood at the edge of the park, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Her fingers trembled slightly, but it wasn't from the chill of the autumn wind. It was the weight of the truth she had just uncovered, a truth she couldn't escape. She had always believed that her life was one of simple choices, a path carved by the decisions she made. But today, everything had shifted. The secrets she'd uncovered about her family shattered her world, crumbling the safe, predictable existence she once knew. She had trusted them, believed in them, but now, as the shadows of betrayal stretched across her soul, she couldn't understand how they had kept the truth hidden for so long. The deep, gnawing pain of this discovery was unlike anything she had ever felt before. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that her own sense of identity was slipping through her fingers. Who was she without the foundation of the people she had relied on? Who could she trust now? Evelyn felt the emotional weight settle in her chest like a stone. This wasn't just a revelation, it was a loss. A deep, irrevocable loss that no words could undo. And as she stood there, the wind tugging at her hair, she knew that nothing would help. Evelyn stood in the silence of her apartment, the letter still clutched in her hand. Her heart pounded in her chest, and yet all she could hear was the overwhelming stillness. She had retreated here, away from the world, away from everything she knew. But even in her isolation, the weight of her discovery clung to her like a shadow, impossible to escape. The letter had revealed a truth so stark, so painful, that she couldn't bring herself to accept it. Her family, the people she trusted most, had lied to her for years. The secret they had kept from her threatened to destroy the very foundation of her life. For the first time, she felt utterly alone. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but the silence was suffocating. Her mind raced, looking for any way to make sense of the impossible truth. She had always believed that love and trust were the pillars of her world. But now, those pillars had crumbled, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Evelyn had spent the entire night pacing, trying to make sense of what had happened. But nothing made sense. Every time she thought she understood, another piece of the puzzle slipped away. She knew she had to confront her family, confront the truth, but the thought terrified her. How could she face the people she had trusted most? How could she look them in the eye after what she had learned? The conflict inside her was suffocating, pulling her in two directions. Part of her wanted to escape, to run far away from the truth, while another part knew she couldn't. She had to face it, for better or for worse. But the fear of what she might discover, of what might change, was paralyzing. The next day, Evelyn sat across from her mother in the kitchen, the air between them thick with unspoken words. The table was set, as it always had been, but today, nothing felt normal. Her mother, warm and composed, avoided her gaze as she stirred her coffee. Evelyn's heart raced, her hands trembling slightly as she opened her mouth to speak. But the words felt like stones lodged in her throat. "I know," she finally whispered, her voice breaking the silence. Her mother's eyes flicked up, and for the first time, Evelyn saw a flash of something. Guilt, fear, maybe even regret. It was fleeting, but it was there. Her mother didn't answer, instead focusing on the coffee cup, the clink of the spoon against porcelain, louder than the silence that followed. "Why?" Evelyn's voice cracked, barely audible. Her mother's shoulders stiffened, but she said nothing, choosing instead to avert her gaze. The truth hung between them like a thick, suffocating fog, and Evelyn's heartache grew heavier. For all the years of love and Evelyn walked alone through the park, the cool breeze rustling the leaves above her. Each step felt like it took her further away from the woman she used to be. The knowledge she now carried was like an anchor, pulling her down, drowning her in a sea of doubt and betrayal. She stopped at a fountain, its water reflecting the dull gray sky above. She stared into the rippling water, watching as the reflections blurred and shifted, much like her own understanding of the world. The pieces of her life that had once fit together now felt like fragments scattered on the ground, too broken to put back in place. She had trusted the people she loved the most, and yet, in one moment, everything had changed. The love she had known now seemed counterfeit. But Evelyn knew she couldn't live in the shadows forever. It was time to make a choice. She could continue to run from the truth, burying herself in the past, or she could face it head-on and rebuild what had been shattered. The fear of what might come next gripped her. Evelyn sat in her apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city outside. But the stillness inside her was deafening. She had tried to continue on, to live her life as she had before, but each passing day felt like a struggle. Every smile she forced, every conversation she had, seemed empty. The weight of the truth she had uncovered pressed heavily on her chest. The betrayal from her mother still lingered, a constant reminder of how much her world had been upended. Every time she thought about the future, the fear crept in. Would she ever be able to trust anyone again? Would she ever be able to truly heal? She tried to hold on to the memories of who she was before the secret, but they felt like distant echoes, fading more with each passing day. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw someone she didn't recognize. Someone broken. She couldn't let go of the past, and yet she couldn't continue living in it. The emotional wreckage was too much to bear. Something inside her had shattered, and she couldn't. The silence was broken by a knock at the door. Evelyn hesitated, unsure of whether she was ready to face anyone. She hadn't wanted visitors, hadn't wanted to talk to anyone about what was going on in her life. But when she opened the door, she found Sarah standing there, her face filled with concern. "I've been trying to reach you," Sarah said softly. "Are you okay?" Evelyn couldn't bring herself to speak at first. She wanted to scream, to push Sarah away, but part of her still longed for the connection, for the comfort Sarah always provided. "I don't know," Evelyn whispered. "I feel like I'm losing everything." Sarah stepped inside without another word, sitting down beside Evelyn. She didn't ask for details, didn't press her for answers. Instead, she simply stayed by her side, offering the quiet comfort of someone who truly cared. The warmth of Sarah's presence felt like a lifeline, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was drifting further away from everything she once knew. Over the next few days, Evelyn began to withdraw further from the people around her, retreating into herself. Her thoughts were consumed with the lie, with the betrayal. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had believed in was a lie. She had always thought her family was a safe haven, a place where she could trust, where love had no conditions. But now, everything had changed. Her own mother had kept the truth from her, and that gap between them had only widened. Every time Evelyn thought of her mother, a new wave of anger and sadness crashed over her. She wanted to confront her, to scream at her for the hurt she had caused, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. What would it change? The truth was out, and no amount of confrontation could undo the damage. She felt helpless, torn between the urge to lash out and the deep, gnawing desire to forgive, even if she didn't know how. It wasn't until she saw her mother again that Evelyn felt the full force of the damage done. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry, wouldn't let the emotions overwhelm her. But when she entered her mother's house, everything she had buried came rushing to the surface. "Why didn't you tell me?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her mother's eyes were red, and for a moment, Evelyn thought she saw the same hurt reflected in her face. "I didn't want to hurt you, Evelyn," her mother said, her voice shaky. "I thought I was protecting you." Evelyn shook her head, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "By lying to me?" she whispered. "By keeping secrets?" Her mother didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes. It was the first time Evelyn truly understood the depth of the wound her mother had inflicted, not just by keeping the truth from her, but by assuming that Evelyn couldn't handle it. She had been shielded from the world, but in the process, her trust had been shattered. The next few days passed in a blur for Evelyn. She tried to piece together the fragments of her broken world, but nothing seemed to fit anymore. She saw her mother less frequently, their relationship strained beyond repair. The lie had cast a shadow that neither of them could escape. Sarah was there, offering her support, but Evelyn still couldn't bring herself to speak about what was really going on inside her. She buried the pain deep within her, thinking that maybe, with time, it would fade. But it didn't. The anger, the sadness, the betrayal, They all simmered beneath the surface, threatening to overwhelm her at any moment. It wasn't until she ran into an old friend, someone from her past who had once offered her unconditional love, that Evelyn began to see the possibility of healing. The friend's words were simple, but they struck Evelyn to her core. You can't move forward until you stop holding on to the past. It was the first time someone had given her a clear path to healing. But it also meant let. Evelyn stood at the edge of the river, the cool breeze tugging at her hair, carrying the scent of the city's distant lights and sounds. The water before her was calm, reflecting the gray sky above. She had returned to this place, this quiet spot by the water, to think, to finally make sense of everything. The lie her mother had kept from her, the unspoken words between them, and the emotional weight that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She couldn't run from it anymore. It had consumed her for too long. Evelyn finally understood that she wasn't just angry at her mother for the lies. She was angry at herself for not being able to see the truth sooner, for not asking the hard questions when they mattered. But the real revelation had come when she realized that, beyond the anger, there was fear. Fear that her life had been built on a foundation of deceit. Fear that her entire identity had been based on false assumptions. The hardest truth was the one she now had to confront. She was afraid of losing Thea. The next day, Sarah came by to check on her, as she had been doing for the past week. Evelyn had kept herself locked away in her apartment, trying to process everything. Sarah entered the room, her usual warmth now tempered by the solemnity of Evelyn's silence. "You've been distant," Sarah said gently, sitting down beside her. "I know you're struggling with everything that's happened, but you can't keep it all in." Evelyn wanted to speak, to explain the turmoil she felt, but the words were lost. Instead, she looked at Sarah, eyes filled with unshed tears. "I don't know who I am anymore," Evelyn admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I feel like everything I believed in has been destroyed." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on Evelyn's arm. "It's okay to not have all the answers right now," Sarah said softly. "You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to take it one step at a time." But even as Sarah spoke, Evelyn knew it wouldn't be that simple. Her life had been turned upside down, and the emotional breakthrough didn't come easily. Over the next few days, Evelyn tried to fill the silence with distractions. She went for walks in the park, visited a few old friends, but nothing helped. The truth of the betrayal kept rising to the surface every time she tried to forget it. It wasn't until she found herself standing in front of her mother's house again that she realized what she had to do. She had avoided this confrontation for far too long, but she couldn't keep running from it. She had to face the woman who had lied to her, the woman who had shattered her trust. Evelyn took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. When her mother answered, her expression faltered. For a moment, there was no sound, no words between them. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of years of silence. "I need you to tell me the truth. All of it." Her mother's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and regret, and Evelyn knew this conversation would be the hardest one yet. But it had to happen. Inside, her mother led her to the living room, where they sat across from each other. The air was thick with the unspoken tension. Her mother began to speak, her voice shaky, as if the words were difficult to form. "Evelyn, I never meant to hurt you," her mother began, her eyes filled with tears. "The truth was so complicated, and I thought it would destroy you if you knew." Evelyn's heart pounded, the flood of emotions overwhelming her. "But why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" Evelyn's voice broke. Her mother's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the chair. "I was trying to protect you," her mother whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I was wrong. I should have trusted you with the truth." For the first time, Evelyn saw the vulnerability in her mother's eyes, a glimpse of the woman behind the facade. It was a fragile moment, one that allowed for the possibility of healing, but Evelyn wasn't sure if she was ready to forgive. The truth had been buried for so. Evelyn left her mother's house that afternoon, with more questions than answers. The conversation had opened old wounds, and while she now knew the truth, it hadn't brought the relief she'd hoped for. She walked aimlessly through the city, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. The truth was clear now, but it felt like a burden. Her mother had kept the secret out of love, but it had only left Evelyn feeling betrayed and lost. As she wandered, she found herself back at the river, the place where she had come to reflect before. The water now felt like a mirror, reflecting the broken pieces of herself she was trying to piece back together. She stood at the edge, looking at the water as it rippled beneath her. And for the first time, Evelyn felt the pull of change. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was the only path forward. She couldn't keep looking back. She had to find a way to heal, to move past the past that had held her hostage for so long. The days that followed felt like an unending fog for Evelyn. She tried to engage with the world around her, but everything felt distant, as if she were a mere spectator in her own life. The city felt alien, the sounds of everyday life almost muffled by the weight of her emotions. Every conversation, every attempt to move forward, felt hollow. The truth about her mother, though revealed, had done little to heal the wound. Instead, it had opened up a chasm within her, one that she couldn't bridge. The anger, once a quiet whisper, had now grown into a loud roar, demanding to be heard. But with every flare of anger came a deep sense of helplessness, as if no matter how much she fought against it, the pain would never leave. And then, there was the guilt. Guilt that she wasn't moving on. Guilt that she couldn't forgive her mother. She sat alone, trying to process everything, but the storm inside her only grew. No one had ever told her that healing would be this hard. No one had warned her how difficult it would be. It wasn't until Sarah reached out again that Evelyn realized how far she had pushed people away. Sarah's voice, once a source of comfort, now held a tone of concern, as if she were speaking to someone she no longer recognized. "Evelyn, I'm worried about you," Sarah said one evening, sitting beside her on the couch. "You can't keep shutting everyone out." Evelyn's eyes flickered with frustration. "I don't know how to deal with all of this, Sarah. It feels like everything I knew is a lie." Sarah reached out, her hand resting gently on Evelyn's. "I know, but you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here." Evelyn closed her eyes, the weight of the words sinking in. She wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the comfort, but the fear of letting anyone in again held her back. "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore," Evelyn whispered, her voice raw. "Not even myself." The words hung in the air, heavy with the truth of her struggle. Sarah didn't say anything for a moment, simply holding her hand, offering. Evelyn began to find solace in small moments. The days were still heavy, the emotional weight ever present, but there were glimpses of peace. A smile from a stranger, a quiet walk in the park, the sound of children laughing in the distance. But just as easily, those moments would be overshadowed by the crushing reminder of her fractured family, her broken trust. The betrayal from her mother lingered like an old wound that refused to heal. One evening, Evelyn found herself sitting alone at her kitchen table, staring at the empty seat across from her, the chair where her mother used to sit. Her heart tightened as she imagined her mother in that spot, speaking to her in that warm, familiar way. The guilt crept back in. Had she pushed her mother too far? Was forgiveness even possible? Evelyn didn't know the answers, and that uncertainty was one of the hardest things she had ever faced. The more she thought about it, the more the path forward seemed like a tangled mess of confusion and fear. She didn't know where to begin. The phone rang late one night. Evelyn hesitated before answering, unsure if she was ready for another conversation that would dredge up the pain she had been trying to avoid. But when she picked up, it was her mother's voice on the other end. "Evelyn," her mother began, her voice shaky. "I don't know how to fix this. I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry." Evelyn's heart clenched, and for a moment she almost hung up. The words felt hollow, but she stayed on the line, listening. "I don't expect you to forgive me," her mother continued, "but I want you to know that I love you. And I've been living with this guilt for far too long. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but the pain she felt wasn't just from the apology. It was the recognition that nothing would ever be the same. The trust that had been broken couldn't be easily repaired. Her mother's sorrow didn't erase the years of lies, and Evelyn knew she couldn't just pick up where they left off. Still, hearing her mother's voice, Evelyn spent the next few days lost in thought. She couldn't deny the gravity of the conversation with her mother, but the pain was still too raw. There were moments when the truth felt like too much to bear, and she wondered if she would ever be able to trust again. But in the midst of her emotional turmoil, a thought lingered. She didn't have to find all the answers right away. Healing would take time. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild. Slowly, with every small step, she could begin to heal. It wouldn't happen overnight, but Evelyn knew that this was the start of something. She wasn't sure how long it would take or what the journey would look like, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. A small, fragile hope that one day she might be able to forgive, to move forward, and to trust again. Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn found herself stuck in a cycle of small victories and crushing setbacks. Each day, she tried to make progress, but the weight of everything still clung to her. It was as though she were swimming against an unrelenting tide. Yet, there were moments, fleeting moments, when she could almost see the light, when she felt a tiny spark of hope flicker inside her. One of those moments came unexpectedly. She was at a cafe, sitting alone, when a familiar face walked through the door. It was Marcus, an old friend, someone she had once trusted deeply. They hadn't spoken in years, but the sight of him stirred something inside her. "Evelyn," he said with a warm smile, as if no time had passed at all. She hadn't realized how much she missed his presence in her life. They sat together, and for the first time in a long while, Evelyn allowed herself to relax. She didn't feel so alone anymore. Marcus listened to her without judgment, offering her a sense of calm she hadn't realized she needed. "It's okay to feel lost, Evelyn," he said quietly. "But you have to take those small steps forward, no matter how small they are." His words, simple yet profound, planted a seed of hope in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, the path forward wasn't as far out of reach as she had believed. In the following days, Evelyn found herself spending more time with Marcus. Their conversations were filled with laughter, but they also carried deeper currents, ones that explored the pain Evelyn had been holding on to. She began to open up slowly, and in his presence, she felt less like a prisoner to her past. Marcus encouraged her to speak about her mother, about the betrayal, and for the first time, Evelyn felt a sense of release as she spoke the words aloud. It wasn't easy. Each word felt like a weight lifted and added at the same time. But it was the beginning of something. She began to understand that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant accepting the truth and finding a way to live with it. "You're not alone, Evelyn," Marcus told her one evening, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "You never have been. And you don't need to walk this path in solitude." His words were like a balm to her raw heart. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt a glimmer of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: hope. Evelyn's newfound clarity came with an unexpected sense of peace. As she spent more time with Marcus, she started to realize something. She didn't have to carry the weight of her mother's betrayal forever. It was a part of her past, yes, but it didn't have to define who she was. She began to make small changes in her daily life, taking time for herself, reconnecting with people she had lost touch with. Her first step was reaching out to Sarah. Their conversation was difficult, filled with tears and apologies, but it marked the beginning of healing. "I've been so caught up in my pain that I forgot how much you've always been there for me," Evelyn admitted. Sarah's response was simple, yet filled with the love and care Evelyn so desperately needed to hear. "I'm here, Evelyn, and I always will be." Slowly but surely, Evelyn started to rebuild the connections that had once been the cornerstones of her life. The pain didn't disappear, but it no longer consumed her. She could finally see a path forward, however The deeper Evelyn delved into her own healing, the more she realized how much of herself she had neglected in the process. She had been so focused on fixing what was broken, on confronting her mother's betrayal, that she had forgotten to take care of herself. For the first time, Evelyn took a step back and asked herself, what did she need, aside from answers? She enrolled in a yoga class, something she had always wanted to do, but had never allowed herself the time for. She started journaling again, capturing her thoughts in a way that helped her release the pressure she had been holding inside. And little by little, she began to reclaim her sense of self. The healing wasn't instantaneous. Some days felt harder than others. But Evelyn finally understood that it wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. And with each small step, she moved closer to the person she wanted to be. A person who could trust again, a person who could forgive, and most importantly, a person who could forgive herself. Evelyn stood in front of the river again. But this time she wasn't looking for answers. She wasn't looking for the past to make sense or for the truth to be less painful. She had already accepted it. The water before her was the same, but she had changed. Her reflection rippled on the surface, distorted for a moment before becoming clearer, as if symbolizing her emotional journey. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Evelyn knew now that she didn't have to walk it alone. She had the support of friends who loved her, the wisdom of the lessons she had learned, and most importantly, the strength she had found within herself. She wasn't the same woman who had walked away from this river months ago. And though the future was unknown, Evelyn finally felt like she was ready to embrace it, to step forward, not as a person broken by betrayal, but as a person reborn from it. Evelyn felt the familiar pull of uncertainty again. Despite the progress she had made, the shadow of her past still lingered. She had been avoiding the inevitable, facing her mother. The years of hurt, the betrayal, the silence between them. It all still felt too raw. But deep down, Evelyn knew this was the last step in her healing. The choice was hers: continue to live with the pain or confront it head-on. There was no turning back now. Her heart raced as she stood at her mother's doorstep once again, this time with the resolve to speak her truth. Her mother opened the door, her face lined with sorrow. "Evelyn," she began, her voice shaky. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm here, ready to listen." The words struck Evelyn like a blow, but in that moment, she realized the depth of her own strength. "I'm not sure I can forgive you yet," Evelyn replied, her voice firm but soft. "But I need to understand. I need to know the truth." Her mother nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I will tell you everything if you're ready to hear it." Evelyn took a deep breath, bracing herself. It was time for the final reckoning. As her mother spoke, Evelyn listened in stunned silence, the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. The truth was painful, far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. Yet, in hearing it, something inside her shifted. The anger that had fueled her pain began to dissipate, replaced by understanding. She wasn't ready to forgive, but she could let go of the bitterness. "I don't know what comes next," Evelyn said quietly. "But this is a start." Later that evening, Evelyn found herself standing by the river once more, looking out at the still water. She had faced her past, spoken her truth, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, she felt a sense of release. The burden had lifted, not because she had found answers, but because she had taken control of her own healing. She was no longer running. Evelyn smiled faintly at her reflection in the water. It was time to move forward, one step at a time. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn began to rebuild her life. The conversations with her mother didn't erase the past, but they opened the door for healing. She continued to nurture her relationships, including the one with herself. Her trust in others began to return, slowly but surely. And though the pain of her past would always be a part of her, Evelyn had learned to live with it, no longer defined by it. She was a different person now, stronger, more self-aware, and ready for whatever came next. Evelyn stood at the edge of the river again, but this time there was no fear, no uncertainty. She had faced her past, confronted her mother, and taken the first steps toward healing. She wasn't free from her struggles, but she was no longer defined by them. The path ahead was still unclear, but Evelyn was ready to walk it. She had learned that the journey was less about the destination, and more about the strength to keep going, no matter how difficult the road. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn reconnected with the people who mattered. The relationships she had neglected began to heal, including the one with her mother. They spoke more honestly now, not always agreeing, but sharing a bond that was slowly being rebuilt. Evelyn found peace not in perfection, but in acceptance of herself, her mother, and her past. She could finally breathe without the weight of bitterness. Evelyn's life began to shift. She found new purpose in small, everyday actions, helping others, embracing new challenges, and, most importantly, taking care of herself. The emotional scars remained, but they were no longer her identity. She had begun to trust again, not just in others, but in herself. She had learned to let go of the past, not as an act of forgetting, but as a way of living. As Evelyn moved forward, she realized that healing was a lifelong journey. There would be setbacks, there would be moments of doubt, but she now knew how to rise again. The world was still filled with uncertainties, but she no longer feared them. She had found strength in her vulnerability, in her willingness to confront the truth, no matter how painful it was. And that was enough for her. In the end, Evelyn knew that she had made it through. Not because she had overcome every obstacle, but because she had chosen to face them. She had found the courage to step into the unknown, to trust again, and to embrace herself fully, flaws and all. As she walked through the city one last time, the weight in her chest had lifted. The future no longer seemed daunting. It was hers to shape.